I want to take you, first of all, right back to what General Sanders said about the 1937 moment. Is he overstating it?
No, it's very interesting, actually, how he pitched it in the speech. He wrote in his letter to his command saying, we must be prepared for a war in Europe in order to prosecute a peace. That's really, which is standard military thinking. But in his speech, it was rather attractive. He was quoting an article in the Royal Engineers Journal by an obscure brigadier called Bernard Montgomery. Not Monty, who later became Monty. And what Monty was saying, it's rather a good piece. It's saying, we are facing war in Europe, and boy, was he right, and we have got to learn to do things differently. Yeah. And that's what Patrick was saying, too. It was a very well-tooled speech, didn't go down terribly well with colleagues, I think, in the dark blue, because he was talking truth to power and saying, we need more heft. They are very worried in the army, and for very interesting and important reasons, having the prospect of 10,000 cut from what is a pretty threadbare outfit. But in fact, they are below their statutory strength anyway. They're about 80,000, but in fact, in real terms, they've only got about 75,000 effective. I think that can be managed. But what the defence chiefs are talking about, which they've got a big sell to do, first of all to the politicians, but through the politicians to the public, is that we have to retool defence, security, resilience at home and abroad. Didn't we learn the role of the military in that through COVID, ignored by the civil service by and large? And by the way, this is not an optional nuisance, bolt-on extra public. It is vital, and it's the vital part of the argument. I find that they're finding it difficult to get across.
Fascinating, because also, going back to where you started with that point, it wasn't simply a point about the long-term strategic structure of the UK's defence spending and defence structures. It's about the immediate threat that's
making it work.
Absolutely, right now in Ukraine. And you and I were chatting before we came in, and we have our sources. You have many more than I in very senior reaches of the defence establishment. But they're talking about not months or even years. They're talking about a decade-long struggle.
They're also talking about 6 weeks. That this thing could be lost in the Donbass if we're not careful, because this is where Zelensky, never behind in coming forward and stating his case. And it's pure theatre, and it's brilliant theatre. It's life and death theatre that he is doing. More. He is absolutely right, but there are two things. That they need more weaponry, they need more organisation. There's a terrible problem of the number of people being killed, wounded, just being taken off the board of normal human life. And by that I mean that there is not such a rigid division between military and civilian in Ukraine. That is very worrying.
Sure.
And this has got to get in quick. And I don't want to go on burbling on. It is quite clear that the Brits are doing a lot. We're doing an awful lot in training, by the way, which is a vital part of it. There are too few munitions, probably because NATO actually in its stocks hasn't got all that much.
Run the risk of running out.
And very, very quickly, people are getting a bit wobbly and dribbly.
Yeah.
Principally the Americans and the Germans.
But if it's a crucial, and I love the way you do that, 6 weeks to make it crystal clear, that is a very short period of time. Isn't that also why people like Matthew Parris in the Times today and other people in the political establishment across Europe are talking about the appeasement bit of 37 as well? Let's kind of cut a deal with Putin now. Otherwise, more people are going to die, more territory is going to be destroyed, more homes are going to be blown up.
Historical analogies don't work. They're valuable, they're instructive in giving pointers, but they're like parallel lines. And as we know, parallel lines don't meet. And this is, I don't want to be cute about this. And this is where the Matthew Parris, Simon Jenkins argument about let's cut a deal, you know, Russia is mighty, it's true, and it's going to be there at the end of the day. And as Biden and Boris Johnson stated from the beginning, we're not actually out to make war against Russia. For all the high-blown, and I think ill-considered, if I may say so, rhetoric of people like Liz Truss. You know, we're not there to smash Russia at all, but we are there to defend a sovereign, independent country whose independence has been recognized and on occasion by Russia of this regime itself, because the fear is, and the one analogy I would bring up to Mr. Paris and others, is 1939, 1940, Finland,
yes,
the Winter War, which was the harbinger of really, although war was declared, of the really big war that was coming in Europe. That's what Patrick Sanders fears.
Yeah, absolutely.
That this is, and we've had signs of it in Latvia, with Kaliningrad, with the Baltic, with the Black Sea, and, which we're forgetting about, where the Russians are extremely active, is over the Arctic Cape.
Yeah. But if you were, I mean, this is complete, total nonsense fantasy, but let's just go through it for a couple of moments. If you were advising Putin, given everything that you know over the last 50 years, and you said, look, NATO are pouring tens, hundreds of thousands of troops all along your NATO border at the moment. They've just given the nod to Sweden, which is a little bit over there, and Finland, which is right down, abutting onto your territory. And they're also welcoming Ukraine into the EU, which is the kind of economic, political bit of it all. You're going to say to Putin, you've got to put the boot in.
No, it's going to be very, very difficult to engage with Putin. I don't buy, by the way, any of this stuff about Putin being ill or being crazy. He's certainly not crazy in his own terms and his very Russian terms. It's very interesting. There's been some excellent writing, in depth. My former colleague at the BBC, Philip Short, has just written a brilliant biography of him. Henry Kissinger talking on the occasion of his new book on leadership, talking about Putin, and Fiona Hill, the Durham lady, who is now a very, very senior, they've all talked to Putin. And Putin's mentality is very strange. He has a mystical view of Russia. Russia is a great entity, and he doesn't care about states and people dying and whatever. And it's vital to his destiny, and he says he is vital to Russia's destiny. Now, it's how you crack into that is going to be so difficult, because engagement has been there with people like Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister. They've talked to him, and it seems to get nowhere.
Final one, and it's got to be quick because I'm being shouted at in my ear, as so often happens when I'm engaged in wonderful conversations. You and I were both in Berlin in 89 for the fall of the wall, and we both did the first Gulf War. I certainly thought that the line had been drawn, that Berlin represented something deeply significant for the peace of Europe, and that the first Gulf War was probably the last huge pitched battle that we'd ever see. We could spend the peace dividend. Were we wrong?
Yes. And also Francis Fukuyama thought the same in The End of History. He didn't say that history had come to an end, but he said world civilization was now on the cards, and it would be a general idea of liberal, open-ended democracies and, with social input, free market economies. That is now not there. The one man was right, but not in the terms that he put it, was Samuel Huntington and the clash of civilizations. It's really that we've got the autocracies versus the open-enders. The open-enders, I call them that, not just democracies. We're still very divided, very divided.
Total pleasure, and to be continued. Thank you so much. Lovely to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Robert Fox there, defence editor of the Evening Standard. Joining me now live from Ukraine is Andrei Osadchuk. He's a Ukrainian MP from the Golosh party. Great to see you, and thank you so much indeed for joining us. The backdrop to this big picture debate is the frightening picture on the ground. As Robert Fox was just saying, it's looking dangerously bad in the eastern part of your country. Donbass is looking bad. Kyiv is under attack again. There have been further examples of war crimes. How close, in your view, sir, is your country to the edge?
First of all, thank you for having me here. It's important for us to speak to the audience in Europe and in the UK. So, yes, at the moment we have extremely deadly, bloody fight in the south and the southeast of Ukraine. Russians accumulated almost all their resources on all their forces. We also have a lot of very painful losses there, because now this war is kind of artillery war. And Russians, they definitely have an advantage in heavy weapons. That's why Ukraine is asking for more and more assistance. Another thing which I'm thinking, listening to your discussions, look, you shall accept one simple thing. At the moment, we all together at war against Russia. It's not Russian-Ukrainian war. We are shooting Russians with your cannons and with your bullets. So we are playing as one team. And for the moment, we don't have any other choices as to win this war, because otherwise the entire world will be under domination of dictatorship regimes, and they will dictate the rules for Europe and for everyone in this world, which is not acceptable.
I'm thrilled to understand that you were able to listen to our conversation, and we're both honoured that you did. One of the other really compelling things that my friend Robert Fox said, and I hope you heard this bit, was it's not necessarily in terms of years and decades. He said it's the next 6 weeks. You could stand or fall in that period of time. Do you agree with that analysis?
No. No, at the moment, we're much stronger than we were 3 months ago, because first 2 months of war, Ukraine, in fact, was fighting by ourselves with our own resources because the West did not believe in us. We were not receiving almost nothing from the West. But now we have already more or less reasonable support. This support will increase, and Ukrainian army for the moment is much stronger than it was 3 months ago. So I think that next 3 months will be probably the most critical, because Russia is much weaker than you think. They accumulate all of their resources. They're afraid to announce the draft. So that's why I think in September, October, it will be a very interesting moment of this war.
Okay. I'd just let you, because you can't see, but Robert Fox is nodding with agreement. Absolutely. In that he drops his 6 weeks and goes along with your 3 months. So we're making brilliant progress here. Can I ask you a blunt question, Andrei? Who's letting you down? We're doing our best. Boris Johnson says freedom is an expensive thing, but Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, says, it's what we can afford. Who's letting you down?
Listen, for the moment, it looks like we see the competition in the West for the leadership in this crisis, in this war. And definitely Boris Johnson, as a very professional politician, he took this leadership, and now he's driving anti-Putin coalition. I think he's right in his words. He's not overestimating the reality. I think the big mistake of the West, and you partially discussed that 5 minutes ago, that in 1991, Soviet Union, in fact, did not collapse. You were too early to celebrate the victory in the Cold War, because Soviet Union, it was not the unity of 15 republics. It was very artificial structure of new Soviet empire, in fact, KGB empire, which stayed alive after 1991. KGB empire lost a lot of territories, but the whole spirit of this totalitarian regime left in Moscow. And during the 90s, this regime was just received more resources. And during beginning of 2000s, with the Western money, it was grown again. And for me, it is the same regime which was in Soviet Union in 30s, 40s, or 70s. So meaning that the entire analysis of the West was wrong. Now we are fighting with the same totalitarian regime which was killing people in Soviet Union 30, 50, 60 years ago.
Boris Johnson's been crystal clear that he thinks you can win, and he believes that you must win. Some of his European partners, not least President Macron in France, and also perhaps to a lesser extent the Italians and the Germans, seem to be hinting that what they want you to do most is try and cut a deal. Do you feel that pressure? Do you reject that pressure?
We were feeling this pressure on the distance, but for the last, let's say, 3 weeks, this pressure almost disappeared, especially after visit of Macron and Scholz to Kiev, and after a positive decision on Ukrainian candidacy to European Union. Because we understand that the defeating of Russia will change the political and geopolitical picture in Europe. And definitely France and Germany, they even probably afraid of Ukrainian victory, because the new players on European map will appear, like strong Poland, strong Ukraine, and will be a new composition of the leadership in the West, in fact. But from another hand, everyone at the moment understands that the failure in Ukrainian war is a direct threat to the failure of liberal democracy in entire Europe. because populists will raise the questions why the hell you spend billions for nothing. And I think it may lead to the victory of populists in both sides of Atlantic, and it will end Western democracy. So that's why, for the moment, the bet went very, very high. And again, now it's not the fate of Ukraine is on the table. Sure. It's the fate of liberal democracy.
Andrei Osadchuk, a real pleasure to talk to you, and take care, and thank you so much for your time. That's Andrei Osadchuk, a Ukrainian MP from the Golosh party. Robert Fox was listening to that, and I don't think I do you a disjustice by saying hang on every word.
Yeah.
Quick 30 take on what the MP said.
Terribly well put. A failure in Ukraine is a failure of liberal democracy. Brilliant. And what we have to do next, which he didn't spell out, and where the Brits come in as a hinge, a pivot, where they're very good at practically, is logistics and training. We've got to really ramp up that, going, as he was saying, to the autumn, and we've got to prepare a new manoeuvre force by the spring.
Robert Fox, thank you so much. See you again very soon, I hope. Bless you. Thanks. My final guest in this chunk of the conversation is Gwythian Prinz, who's former advisor to the Ministry of Defence and indeed to NATO, a fellow in history at Emmanuel College, Cambridge University, and latterly a lecturer in politics. And Gwythian joins me on the phone. We had a little problem with linking up in the vision, but you will be able to hear him crystal clear, but may have to endure my face for perhaps a little longer than you would like. But do bear with us. Gwythian, thank you so much for joining us. Do you agree, first of all, with the likes of General Sanders that this is our 1937 moment, or as I think you've corrected him, our 1935 moment?
Yes, good afternoon, and hello, Robert. It's an honour to join such a bravura conversation. Yes, it's a 1935 moment for a very specific reason, because in July of that year, the chairman of the military subcommittee of the Committee of Imperial Defence was a dark blue gentleman called Admiral Only Chatfield. And he did something which needs to happen now from our current uniformed leadership. He threatened to resign if he was not allowed to propose to Parliament a requirements bill for rearmament without reference to the Treasury and costs in the first instance. In other words, he rejected entirely the notion that you start with the percentages. He said you have to start with the requirement. He got his way. If he hadn't got his way, the rearmament of the later 1930s, the Chatfield ships, the King George V class battleships, the Chatfield carriers, and indeed the accelerated Spitfire program, the radar program, none of those things would have been in place. So my point here would be that, as Robert said, and he's right, defense expenditure is always sui generis. It's unlike any other form of public expenditure in a democracy. And the reason is that in a democracy, defense expenditure is not controlled by any minister, not even the prime minister. The level of our defense expenditure is controlled by our enemies. We will always spend what it takes. And therefore, at this point, and this is Patrick's point, it would be prudent to follow the Roman advice, which is actually the motto of the Royal Navy. If you desire peace, prepare for war. Let us make now a rebuilt deterrent which will permit us in NATO to have the backstop which we require for our own use.
Sure.
And in the first instance, we have to support the Ukrainians in the way that were being described.
Absolutely. Let me just remind folk at home that former advisor of the Ministry of Defence, still deeply involved with NATO. Do you also agree with the Prime Minister, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, that if the entirety of NATO doesn't step up to the plate on defence spending, whatever you then do with it strategically, but if they don't commit in tangible terms, then Ukraine is in play. And Fox said initially it'll fall possibly within the next 6 weeks. The Ukrainian MP said 3 months. But this is the vital period, unless that spending is stepped up and unless that kit arrives. Do you agree?
Broadly, yes, and I'm much more with Andrei Osadchuk than I was with Robert's first observation. This is an important moment, but do remember that the Russian forces suffered an historic defeat in the first phase of this war. They are currently with 85% of their combined force committed in the effort in the Donbass, and they are making very slow and bloody, almost First World War progress. They are short of high-quality leadership, and Mr. Putin is now behaving just as Hitler did in the last days of his life and of the Second World War. He is meddling in the detailed positioning and dispositions of his forces. He has just sacked the cheerfully named butcher of Aleppo, General Dvornikov, and replaced him with a 20-stone retread retiree called General Pavel, whose great claim to fame was massive failure in Afghanistan. So the Russian forces are not 10 feet tall. I think that they are at what the military would call maximum effort. I think Robert would probably agree with me. And as Andrei Osachuk said, the Ukrainians are a rising force. Also, Alistair,
Final
an
point,
absolutely
Gwithian, if you'd be so
crucial
kind.
point. Yes, a very crucial point. As Napoleon said, the moral is to the material as 3 to 1. And the morale of Ukrainian forces is at a very high pitch. We have the responsibility to ensure that they dictate the terms of the final settlement. Otherwise, we will find ourselves faced with problems of a much greater scale, even in the Baltic states, in the future.
Gwithian Prinz, a real joy to talk to you as well, Senior Fellow at the Office of the and Special Advisor on Central and Eastern Europe Affairs at NATO. Really good to talk to you. Robert Fox still here with me in the studio listening to that, and Andrei, the MP from Ukraine.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.